Power. I'm glad everybody could be here. And the topic today is out of fear. So let me start. We'll start right from the big book and reading what it says about fear on page 67. Notice on the last paragraph it says, notice that the word fear is bracketed along the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, the employer, and the wife. So it's telling us here that the fear is a self-centered fear, as we learned by doing these steps in the program. We learned in step 3 was the cause of our problems. It had to do with the self. It all had to do with the thinking, of ourselves. And it goes on to say, this short word somehow touches every aspect of our lives. It was the evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it. So it's telling us here what the problem is, right? But it's interesting, on the next page, I've read this a million times, but I never really brought it into my heart or my soul or fully comprehended it. Sometimes I read something, it's like I read it for the first time. But here it's telling us we're going to have the solution here to our fear on the next page. Of course, it says it was the evil and corroding factor. Okay, so in our lives, if something's evil and corroding, we want to get rid of it. Okay, a lot of times we try to look, here it is, from self-will, from our intellect. We always try to figure out the fear. How can I get rid of it? Sometimes people say, I wanted to delve into it, to feel it. You know what I'm saying? What's interesting about that is that we have a reaction also. Fear and anxiety is an interesting concept because it's your perception of it. Let me, I thought of this illustration. People, first of all, they go to scary movies, or they'll jump out of an airplane or bungee jump, and they say, wow, I love that excitement, exhilaration. I love that feeling of adrenaline and fear. But to a lot of us, what happens is when we feel that emotion, we catastrophize it. We get it and we resist it. And when we resist something, we make it worse, and rather than surrendering to it, right? So we use this fear as something that catapults us into the evil, really worse fear, catastrophization of it, and we get really what we call depressed and anxious. So we surrender. When our emotions come in and we feel them like anger, fear, resentment, rather than resisting it, we can make friends with it. We can understand and comprehend it, okay? Because why do some people, they do things in their life to experience their fear, and they say, oh, that's great, I felt, tremendous fear. And even like depression, some people, what happens to most of us when we feel depressed or anxious, what happens is we take that feeling, we feel, well, I'm going crazy, it's the worst thing in the world, I'm going to end up being really upset. So, the whole thing is the understanding, comprehension that these things can be our ally, our friends, these emotions, but definitely not to resist them and to look at them and observe them, as like we observe other things. It's our perception towards them, because we can have, it says in here in the big book, we can have peace and serenity in the face of all the difficulties, as Bill says. We can have this with the conception and perception change. Now, how does we get this change? So, right, it's going to tell us, because in my whole life, I, again, tried to figure everything out, what's going on. If I can analyze, if I can intellectualize, if I can get more self-help books, if I can use my self-will and figure it out, and everything will be fine. So it's going to tell us here as we go on here. It says on page 68, it gives us the solution. It says, first of all, we reviewed our fears thoroughly. Now, it doesn't use the word we analyzed our fears thoroughly. We discussed them thoroughly. We reviewed them thoroughly. But review, to me, is a way of acknowledging them, because it also uses the word we acknowledge our fears. My whole life, I tried to comprehend, understand, try to figure it out, try to push it away, try to resist it. Whatever it was through self-will. For better morals, a philosophy of life was able to cure us alcoholics and compulsive overeaters or any other problems in our lives, we would recover long ago. So the self cannot resolve this problem. I'm the one who created it. My best thinking got me here. So how can I possibly resolve something? So if we want the resolution to a question, and we just go to the steps, step 1 says I was powerless, right? And step 2 said I had to be restored to sanity. So the first step towards comprehending to self is understanding our crazy thinking coming from the ego. Anything that comes from the self is false and is going to cause us to be miserable. It's going to cause us to have desires, and that's going to cause us suffering. So it goes on to say we review our fears thoroughly. We put them down on paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. We ask ourselves why we had them. Wasn't it, and this is the whole thing I just been saying, this is the whole key right here. Wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? So the whole thing is about self, making myself a higher power, trying to figure it out. We can't do that. Because our insane thinking is what got us here, because we're coming from the self. Now, there are two sides to us. There is the self, the ego self, through the intellect, and there's also a spiritual side. Now, the intellect and ego is false. The spiritual side is the truth. The truth will set you free. So when we get connected, and the only way to do it is to relax, get centered. We have our step 11 through prayer and meditation. It goes on to say here, and it'll just tell us exactly here what to do. Okay, wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? But it says self-reliance was as good as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Some of us once had great confidence, right? How many people tried to build up their self-confidence and figure, if I, make more money, if I'm more successful, if I have more alcohol, food, all of these things related to everything outside of us. The solution and his answer is in here. And as we read here, it's going to tell us the answer. But everything I did through self-will, trying to analyze, figure it out, trying to read a million books. I had shelves full of self-help books, right? Millions of them. So it's telling us here, we don't have to, I went for years through that. This is a program of spiritual transformation. Step one said I was powerless, but every time I tried to do something was through my self-will and willpower. And every time during the day, if you're depressed right now, you're upset, you're thinking, trying to figure it out, you're thinking of the self. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that was our problem. So it goes on to say here, self-reliance was good, it was as good as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Some of us had great confidence, but it didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other problem. When it made us cocky, it was worse. Perhaps there is a better way. So right here, right now, we could have that transformation by understanding this. They say, we could read it a million times, we can look at it, but if right now, the comprehension, for example, the promises, how many meetings have I gone to and I heard the promises read? Or how many meetings have I gone to and seen step one up there? But I read it, intellectually knew what it meant, but I didn't bring it into my heart. So right here, right now, if you have that fear, if you're upset, or you're worried about things, the topic is out of fear, and just to understand the falseness, and it's not from our soul. God created us. We made this world to be happy and free. We take it upon ourselves. When we get out of self, and that's what these steps are about, all happiness and joy just comes in. We don't even have to look for it. We don't have to go anywhere. We don't have to do anything. That's our basic nature. Just again, as a little child is always happy, and there's a reason for that, because they don't develop their ego, right? Ego is easing God out, making myself God. So that's not the way we were created for. That was created for what? The fight or flight response. If I'm in the wilderness and a lion is going to attack me, then it's a different story. But when we have this transformation, it's really, again, I don't know how much, the reason I do these meetings is just to explain to you that when we reread this, you don't even have, it's not going to take another 10 years or 5 years to get your marbles or 10 years to learn how to use them. You hear all these sayings in the rooms. That transformation that happened to Bill and the people in these rooms, have that spiritual awakening can happen momentarily right now. And it tells us here. It tells actually, I'm reading a section of the big book here. These are called the fear prayers, but this is related to everything else. This is the whole program. And almost every page in here discusses the whole program, because the whole program is very, very simple. But the simple program it is so hard for us to comprehend it. Again, it's all about letting go, letting a higher power. That's why 9 times out of 12 steps about a higher power. Again, for better morals of life or philosophy of life, we would have recovered long ago. How many of you here have gone to all kinds of ways and professionally to get it all straightened out and figured out and read books on it and try to analyze it. You'd go somewhere and try, what am I going to do? What am I going to say? Or what can I, when I walk out the door, is the way I'm dressed, the neighbor going to like me? It's all due to the self-centered self, right? Selfishness, self-centeredness. This is our problem. It also has to do, the self is in the past. The self is trying to plan the past. It's also regretting the future. So this whole program is being in with the truth. You see, some people say, there are philosophies where some people go and they say, look, I've tried to resolve the issues and everything. So maybe I can do this by self-will, and then maybe I can figure it out. And all of this and all of these issues and all of these problems, but we find we can't, because no matter, our best thinking got me here. So it's saying here that the answer and the solution is trusting in a higher power. The whole program is about that. And we get that comprehension, understanding, and surrender. When we're quiet and still, the whole world will surrender to us. Everything will come to us, all the answers. Again, we can't resolve anything that we don't already know. Nobody can teach us anything we don't already know. So in other words, when we're trying to figure things out and do different things, we're trying to figure it out, but we already know it. We're trying to, when we go ask 10 people the answer to our problem, or if we sponsor 10 people, go to 1,000 meetings, it's not the answer. The answer is, step 11 says, through prayer and meditation, a higher conscious contact with that spiritual side. It says God is in us all the time. It's always there. Our comprehension, higher power is always there all the time. So to have this comprehension, understanding, and way of life is just totally what it's all about. So, and then it goes on to say, perhaps, okay, so the base of trusting and relying upon God. That's right after it says there's a better way. We think so, for we are now on a different basis. The first, on page 68, in the second paragraph, the first two sentences say, perhaps we are on a better way. So it's saying here, the basis of trusting and relying upon God. So the answer is getting out of the self, getting out of making ourselves a higher power. The whole solution, the whole thing, this is the whole program here. Again, how many times either we're in the problem or we're in the solution? How many meetings have we gone to? We discuss our problem. How many times have people talked about their problems? The problem we know. Everybody knows the problem. But it's interesting about the problem. And I ask this to people sometimes. I said, is your problem true? Is your anger, resentment, is your fear true? Okay. These are things that are false because they're on a false premise. We're built up what society told us the way to think, act, or feel. Society told us to be totally in what our parents told us. We had to be better at school. The teachers told us that we had to be successful, make more money, do other things. So how can we possibly, with all of this craziness and this thinking coming from the self and the ego, be happy? We're depressed, because no wonder we're depressed, because we always want things to go our way, and we want to control, as it says on page 60 and 61, to be the director and control the actors of the stage. Let me go on here. So it's saying here, we trust infinite God. When we're in with spiritually, when we're unity with the universe and have that feeling with the love and acceptance and tolerance, then we're in unity with God. The falseness is the fear and anxiety. Again, God created those things also in case, again, if somebody puts a gun to our head, but we use it for when somebody looks at us the wrong way, they call us a name, they cut us off on the highway, and the way out of this, and we're going to talk about the sick man prayer in the pages before this, is from having that love, compassion, tolerance, and we get it by being still and bringing a higher consciousness into our lives. So it says here, we are in the world to play the role he assigns. It's on page 68 again. It's on the second paragraph, the first fear prayer. Just to the extent that we do as we think he would have us. Okay, so a higher power, a higher consciousness comes from doing a higher power's will. But that that's our innate will. You see, the whole comprehension, this whole thing is this: to comprehend the fact that we were born perfect. The way we were born with this innate sense. Again, children, right? Children, you see them play, they're in the present, they're very happy. So the thing is that that's inside of us. We're looking all outside. We're looking for the pleasure things. And if I can do this better, if I can go geographically live someplace else or do other things in my life, then everything would be great, right? But it never worked, because the more pleasure we get out of things, the more pain is on the other side. Because if I win $1 million in a lottery, then I'll look at somebody who has 2 million or won 10 million. It's never ending. It's the more we get, the more we want, and it causes more suffering. If that was the case, billionaires would be very happy and they wouldn't be killing themselves, and very successful people would be. And also, for us who, quote, are trying to find success, what a poor way to live. To trying to be successful, or trying to have more things in life, and to envy, it's envy, the 7 deadly sins, envy, jealousy. This all has to be due to the self. The freedom and joy comes from when we let these steps in this program here. The spiritual awakening is when we bring our consciousness to a higher level, a higher power, bring a God of our understanding in. Good, great out nature, universe, spirit of universe. It could be all the religions. Look, this isn't a concept. A lot of people say, well, AA, could be a cult. This concept is the concept for all the major philosophies, Eastern and Western religions, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism. They all have this thing to take refuge or salvation in something else, that higher in our higher consciousness. But they all came to the conclusion that it was in there all the time. But we go around life, we're looking everywhere and every place for this higher consciousness and this value in life and this greatness. If only people would do what I want, life would be great. If only that's all with the past and the future. But the whole thing is, people say, I try not to go into the past and not go into the future. Or this is the whole thing. All you have to do is realize the falseness of it. Just say to yourself, look, I'm feeling depressed. I'm anxious today about what happened. Okay, take the emotion, feel it, but look at it, observe it, and say, it's crazy. Step 2 says we had to be restored to sanity, because anytime the past could be an illusion, the past is the past, okay? And here we are, sometimes 10, 20, 30, 40 years later, worrying about something that happened in the past. And people always say, well, how about these traumatic things that happened to me? Something really bad happened to me in the past. Okay, yeah, well, I just want to say 98% of the time, it's something very ridiculous. Again, we'll be controlled by people, the world. We're in fear and anxiety because we haven't, the truth will set you free. These steps are the basis of major philosophical religions. It's not just some, people say, oh, it's a 12-step program. No, these things came based on religious precepts. And those religious precepts were based on major religions, but also major philosophies. When you read them and you hear all the ancient Greek philosophies, there's billions of people in the world that believe in religion. There's a reason why. So again, we can have that awakening right now. Anytime, if you're in fear right now, you're anxious, you came to the meeting because you wanted to get the answer, trying to figure it out. No, we just have to do what step 3. We're going to read we'll go through the step 3 prayer, but before I do, let me read on here so we see. So just to the extent that we do, this is page 68, do we think he would have us and humbly rely on him? Does he enable us to match calamity with serenity? Wow. That one phrase, calamity with serenity, again, it's perception. So if there's big calamity in my life and things all around me are going on, I can say, well, the more calamity, the more serenity. Don't you understand? It's perception. It's the perception to perceive life differently. It's not about Bob anymore when I do these steps. And during the day, somebody's going to say, well, isn't it ever? Yeah. When I get upset or anxious, the switch goes off. We talked about the light switch going off and knowing I'm doing my self-will, thinking of the self. The self is just an enigma. It's some kind of illusion in our mind. Because 10 people have 10 different selves. In the Kabbalah and the Zohar, they talk about that's ancient Jewish mysticism. They have a thing where they talk about that you can go out and enjoy the world, but everything you see, hear, and do. And it's not just that philosophy. This is in all philosophies pretty much, that anyone, whatever religion it is. These are things of the flesh, they call them, right? We want to go into in our book here, it talks all about this, the 4th dimension. We want to get into that 6th sense, right? out of the five senses, the taste, the seeing, the eyes deceive us, what we see. I was blind, but now I see. What we see is through the glasses. It's all craziness. That's not life. That's not living. This steps in this program tells us what it is, because step 3 says, I'm reading a fear pierce here, but what is it saying? Made a decision to turn my will and my life over to a care of a higher consciousness, of a God of my understanding. That's the answer. And in doctor's opinion, and we agnostics, it tells us, man, it says there's only one answer, spiritual solution. They tried everything. They called it the scientists of the day. Even the scientists today, right? They're all the doctors and everything for we alcoholics, but it's not just alcoholics. I'm powerless over everything in my life. It resolved doing this program, going to AA. Not only did I stop drinking and going to OA and stop eating the food, the whole solution came from these steps. The solution, people say, well, Bob, maybe talk more about the food or these problems or issues. No, the step comes, it tells us, having had that spiritual awakening, and it tells us here exactly how it's done. And all the defects of character that we have, I have a list of them here. See, the way we can do the 4th step is to understand the resentment, the fear, the selfishness, dishonesty, false pride. These are the way over this. I used to try to figure, well, I'm not going to feel prideful. I'm not going to be angry. No, to understand that they're not, to know the true from the false. That's what the doctor's opinion said. We had to know the true from the false. The truth will set you free. The truth is, when I'm feeling anxious, when I'm upset, when I'm depressed, when I'm in pride, when I'm jealous, and when I'm envious, it's not true. It just isn't true. That's the whole key and the whole secret of this program. It's a simple program, just to get out of the self and realize that it's not true at all, that all of these things we say, do, or think are just not true. They just aren't. Again, 10 people had 10 different opinions, and all they do is get you depressed and upset. The past could be an illusion. We don't know. What does it matter? But when we lose the self, we can even accept. Can you imagine that? Accepting your own death? Can you imagine that? Accepting death of those around you? Because it's not, again, if something, it's always related to the self. I say to people, if you're upset today, guess what you're thinking about, right? They're thinking the self. So when we lose the self and we get into a higher consciousness, we lose the self, we find the whole world. Okay? To get out of the self is to find and understand everything and comprehend everything, because that facility is in us. The ability to be joyful, happy, blissful, all of these things are there, but we look for them in the wrong places. It takes us to material things. I'm talking before the meeting about somebody talking about fasting. Why do people fast? Why are people abstinent? Lust, gluttony, these are part of 7 deadly sins, because these material things take us away, because the material we make them a higher power. We have resentment towards somebody. Talked about it here. We're just reading about anger and fear. That's making what we think about the most is a higher power. So let me go on and read here. It says, we never apologize to anyone for depending upon our Creator. We can laugh at those who think spirituality is a way of weakness, paradoxically is a way of strength. So in my life, somebody could be there yelling at me, pushing my buttons, cutting me off on the highway. The real weakness is when I get into the ego and self-centeredness and react and get upset. They say the best way to have revenge on somebody, if not that we should do that, is to love them. So when we have this precept of love, tolerance, we bring that higher consciousness in, our life changes. When we become oneness with people, we have compassion, love, and understanding. If they try to push our buttons, we just see that they're just sick people, that they're just spiritually up, there's a problem there, and we don't have to be part of it. What we could do is have love and compassion, because, it says in the sick man prayer, they like ourselves are sick too. But the answer to, when we straighten out physically, the emotion and physical change. And it says that in our book here. When we straighten out spiritually, when we become spiritual means, again, rising above the ego, rising above the self, being on a new plane of consciousness, having that new way of thinking. When we're spiritual, then we become, life changes, and we still, and life surrenders to us. When we're still, all of life surrenders to us in the way, I used to tell you the story where I'd go to a meeting, and the nun there, she was one of the people at the meeting, she was a nun, and she would just say, we come around at time to her to share, and these people are talking about all their problems and this and that, and she would just say, just sit. Just sit. And I told you a story too about a guy who went to a rehab of a religious order. It was very full, and everybody wanted to go to this rehab, and it was through a religious order. And when he got there and he finally talked to them, he finally got up there, and the guy said to him, okay. He goes, he took all his information, everything. You see that room there? He says, just go in there and sit. So an hour later, he comes back out. He says, and the guy said, just go in there and sit. And finally, it dawned on him that that's it. We could be centered, still, and through meditation, prayer, and the answers are all there. The answer I usually find is that, to do all of these problems is it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't. But when we get out of the self, it really, really doesn't matter. When it's not about Bob, and my whole thing is about this spirituality, and I can just observe my fear, my anger, and just say, okay, that's okay. I could be like the guy, the example I use about the guy who bungee jumps, right? He loves that. They love the adrenaline. They love the fear. But we have a tendency, a little bit of fear, and I'm getting anxious. I'm going crazy. No, we can make friends with it. We can embrace it. And then we can understand. We don't have to try to figure it out or work through it. I always hear, we got to work through my fear. It's like a hot coal. It's a lower level of thinking, jealousy, envy. Why would we want to sit with it and figure it out? And why would we want to discuss it? It says here, we review them thoroughly, but what happens after that? For anybody who's done the other steps, 5, 6, and 7, the word cast, they're cast out. Because when we bring, bring God in, and love and kindness and tolerance, what happens to the fear? What happens to when people try to, boss at work yells at me, or somebody, my wife or my children, I always had to look at my whole life. I was the victim. I was saying, look what people did to me. Finally, I had to say to myself, Bob, were you a good son? Were you a good brother? Were you a good father, a husband? Okay. Finally, that was the spiritual awakening when I could say and look at myself, because then I was in the solution. Being in the problem, we know about the problem, but it never gets resolved. We can analyze it all day, try to figure it out. But that's not God consciousness. We're making, again, what we're doing is when we try to figure it out, we're making it more real. You follow that? We're making it more real. That's what we're doing. If I say to you, look, somebody, so-and-so did this, said this to me, they treated me this way, then I'm saying, well, it's a reality. I told you a story about the guy I work with who was from India. He says, when the elephant walks down the street and the dogs bark, the elephant just ignores them. When we have this spiritual awakening, this God consciousness, then we could, like it says here, when people say to us, we just read that we could just smile. We could rise above our problems, okay? We're like an airplane going over the clouds, because this is the real God esteem, not self-esteem. The word self-esteem has the word self in it. So the more self-esteem, people always say, I want to build up my self-esteem. You know what that means? That means they want to be better than other people, right? It's saying that if I have a bigger car, a bigger house than a neighbor, that will build up my self-esteem. Then I'll be happy. No, humility. It talks about that. What is the key word in step 6? Humility. Okay, willingness, and then step 7 talks about humility. Humility is the opposite of pride. When we're humble in this world and we just don't get in that human experience, we can enjoy it, but it's not about that. All the depression, all the anxiety has to do with, it's interesting. Somebody once said to me, I was upset. I was at a job and I was working there, and, I was standing in the corner, and the people there, they would say stuff and do things. And sometimes, I was getting upset. And I said to somebody there, and you know what they told me? They said, Bob, you have a big ego. And I said to them, because I was shy, and I was in the corner. And I said, well, what do you mean? I have a big ego. It was my ego, right? That was saying to me that if somebody looked at me the wrong way, God forbid somebody come over and say I wasn't doing my job right, I would be in self-centered fear. These are the fear prayers, right? But when I have this consciousness and this love and tolerance and patience and see everything differently, then I could only sit there and smile. And sometimes, I'm with somebody and they're trying to get me upset, or I don't know what they're doing. It's none of my business, as they say. What other people say do is none of my business. But almost I try not to have that smirk on my face. I'm like looking, I'm saying, here's a crazy person, right? And who's more crazier? What was more crazier is me if I react to it. If I'm reacting to somebody else's craziness, who's the crazy one, right? And also, people always say that they talk about toxic people, right? That person's toxic. I didn't realize, in all those situations, I was the toxic one because that toxic person, I wanted them to act and do what I felt the way they should treat me and what they should do. Now I could just sit there and smile and have love and patience for them and I don't have to try. This is the beauty of this whole thing, this whole spiritual awakening, this whole being reborn and thinking. We don't have to try anymore. It's done. We just have to appreciate and bring that consciousness in, and all the work is done for us. Why? Because we're releasing the sunlight of spirit, which was in there all the time. Right now, right here, this moment, if you get out of the self and you get humility about life and just be in the present, there's no alternative. The joy and happiness comes there. Just like an example is a puppy dog. Why is every day the best day of a puppy dog's life? Because it doesn't have this intellect. God gave us this great ability to think, but guess what we do with it? Like everything else good in life, we misused it. We misuse it to think about the self and to try to control things and play a higher power in God. No, the intellect is there to a degree to figure things out as far as it goes. But the real power, I'll give you a perfect example. Like if you try in sports, they call being in the zone. Okay, here's an analogy, right? So people say, I tried to catch the ball, or you say golf. A lot of people like golf. So the pro tells you got to hit the ball, put your shoulder here, put your hand here. And then, when I took a lesson, by the time I was doing it, I was like, like that, couldn't even hit the ball or catch the ball, whatever it was. Years ago, they had a book called Inner Tennis, and it was all about that. But when we get that indwelling spirit, when we get out of figuring it out, figuring out is not one of the steps. When we get out of the self-will, the selfishness, self-centeredness, when we get out of that and we just relax and do prayer, meditation, enjoying and just feel oneness. It's, when we think these things, we're separated from the universe. That's why there's no energy there. The energy there comes from emanating from the universe constantly into us. It's always there. The power is always there. We just have to pick it up and feel it and generate it from other people. When you're in conversation with somebody and it doesn't matter, you get that energy. And today, when somebody's confrontational, I get more energy. It says here, meet calamity with serenity. I'm just saying, this guy's crazy here. And I'm starting to laugh to myself. But not only that, if you really, really have a crazy person who's trying to bully you, you can really get them, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. You can really, they'll go, they won't know what to do when you just smile and have patience and tolerance for them. And you just, and then they'll respect you. And then you can say whatever you want to them. Say, hey, you're crazy. And why are you acting that way? And they'll just smile too. Because finally we're having that comprehension, being still, comprehension, and this is the answer to our problems through God consciousness. No other way. No millions of books. Like I had self-help books, thousands of them. I tried. And the more I tried to figure it out, the more real I made the problem, because that was being in the problem, not the solution. Okay, so it says here, and then I want to hear the shares. I'm sorry I'm going on so long, but it says here, and men of, okay, the verdict of the ages, again, I talked about the religions and philosophies and people in the whole world, billions of people believe this, is that faith means courage. I just talked all about that. Faith means courage, right? You want to be a weakling? Try to get better than someone. Try to show them who you are. Try to make more money, be more successful. That's a weakling. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. It comes from trusting and letting go and surrendering to the higher power. We never apologize for God. Instead, we let him demonstrate through us what he can do. We ask him to remove our fear. So we just get into that higher consciousness and the fear goes away. We don't do it. As soon as you try to do it, and again, we talk about the addiction to the food. As soon as I try on my own to figure out how to stay away from these foods or the alcohol, the drugs, or people, I can't. It just doesn't work. Because we're in the self. The self can't do it. The self created these problems. It's the self that's the problem. And then this higher conscience, your life turns around. All your problems turns around. It says here, the answer to all our problems at once. We commence to outgrow fear. But anyway, that's on page 68. It talks about part of step 4, the fear prayer, fear prayer 1 and 2. And before that, I didn't even get into it. It's a sick man prayer, which is the practical application of what we said. But we're not going to do that now. But anyway, if anybody would like to share, please do so now. Okay, go ahead.